They changed the locks at 11 in the morning, while the street was full of people who had somewhere to be. Iris Halloway stood on the pavement outside the maisonette that had been hers for 9 years and watched a man in a high-visibility vest drill out her own front door, and she understood that the worst part of losing everything is not the loss. The worst part is how ordinary it looks to everyone else. A van, a clipboard, a locksmith who would not meet her eye because meeting her eye was not in his remit. 2 cardboard boxes on the step holding what the bailiffs had decided she was permitted to keep, which was not, she noted, the small framed photograph of her father, because that had glass in it and glass had value, and value had been the whole of her undoing. "You can collect the rest from the storage facility," the woman with the clipboard said, not unkindly. "There's a list. You've got 90 days before disposal." "I won't have it in 90 days, Iris said, "but thank you." The woman looked at her properly then, the calm voice, the steadiness, the absence of the screaming or the weeping she was clearly braced for, and something flickered across her face that Iris had grown used to in the last year. People expected a ruined woman to come apart. When she didn't, they grew uneasy, because a person who is calm while being destroyed is a person who knows something, and not knowing what it is unsettles them. Iris knew quite a lot of things. That was the trouble. She had built her life on knowing things, and the world had decided very publicly that she knew nothing at all. She picked up the 2 boxes, balanced them against the iron railing, and walked away from the maisonette without looking back, because looking back was a luxury, and she was, as of that morning, entirely out of luxuries. A year before, Iris Halloway had been one of perhaps 30 people in the country whose word could move a great deal of money. She was a provenance researcher, the person who establishes whether a painting is what it claims to be, who painted it, and when, whose hands it had passed through, whether the documents that vouched for it were genuine or whether they were, like so much in her trade, an elegant fiction. It was patient, unglamorous, forensic work, and she had been very good at it. Good with pigments and craquelure and canvas weave, better still with paper, the watermarks, the inks, the way a forged provenance always tried slightly too hard, the way a lie has a grain you can read if you have spent 15 years learning to read it. She had read one lie too well. The painting was a small oil called the Ferryman at Dusk, attributed to a celebrated 19th century master, and it had come up for sale at Sterling's, the oldest and grandest auction house in the country, 300 years of reputation, a name that meant the same thing as certain. Sterling's had authenticated it. Sterling's had catalogued it. Sterling's expected it to sell for somewhere near £4 million to a museum trust that was raising the money from public subscription. Schoolchildren, pensioners, a town that wanted its famous son's masterpiece to come home. And a private buyer, nervous about the price, had quietly commissioned Iris to check. She had checked, and the painting was wrong. Not obviously. The hand was extraordinary. Whoever had made it was a master in their own right. But the provenance had a seam in it, a gap in the 1920s papered over by a single dealer's receipt, and the receipt was on a paper stock that carried an optical brightener not manufactured until after the Second World War. A forger had reached for a period-looking sheet and reached, by a margin of 2 decades, wrong. It was the kind of thing only someone who had spent her life with paper would ever catch. Iris had caught it, and she had done the thing she had always believed her profession existed to do. She had told the truth. She had told it quietly in a written report to her client. She had not anticipated that her client, alarmed, would withdraw from the sale and let it be known why. She had not anticipated that Sterling's, confronted not with a quiet correction but with a public doubt that threatened a £4 million sale and 300 years of the word certain, would not pause, would not check, would not thank her. They would destroy her instead. It had been done with surgical grace. Sterling's convened its own panel of experts, eminent, gray, beyond reproach, who examined the Ferryman at Dusk and pronounced it genuine beyond question. They produced their own provenance research, conducted by Sterling's head of department, and it explained the troublesome receipt as a later copy of a lost original, a clerical irregularity, nothing more. And then, having defended the painting, they turned to the woman who had doubted it, and they made of her a cautionary tale. She was, the briefing said, an overreaching freelancer with a history of contrarianism, a self-promoter who manufactured doubt to make a name. Her optical brightener finding was dismissed as testing error from an uncertified lab. A trade journal ran a piece, sourced entirely from Sterling's, headed "The Doubt Merchant," and the phrase stuck the way a cruel phrase always sticks to a woman in a field that has decided it is finished with her. Her certifications were quietly questioned. Her clients, who depended for their own credibility on hers, melted away within a season, because no collector wants to be advised by the woman the great house of Sterling's has called a fantasist. The Museum Trust completed its purchase to general rejoicing. The Ferryman at dusk hung now in a provincial gallery with a brass plate beneath it, and schoolchildren were brought to see it. And Iris Halloway, who had told the truth about it, lost her income, her standing, her savings, her flat, and last and most quietly, the man she had been going to marry, a fellow specialist named Daniel, who had told her, with real sorrow, that he could not afford to be associated with her position. "You might be right, Iris, but being right isn't the same as being able to live." She had thought at the time that this was the cruelest thing anyone could say to her. She would learn in time that it was the truest, and that the whole second half of her life would be the work of proving it wrong. The auction at which Iris bought the railway station was held in the function room of a pub in a market town she had never had reason to visit, and she went to it for the same reason she did most things that spring, because it was warm and free to enter, and being somewhere was better than being nowhere when nowhere was all you had. She had a little money, not much, the dregs of a redundancy that wasn't quite a redundancy, a few £100 she had kept in cash because cash could not be frozen by the people now pursuing her for Sterling's legal costs. She had been awarded against, of course. When you doubt a great house and lose, you pay for the privilege. She had £240 in an envelope, and no plan for it beyond making it last, and she sat at the back of the function room out of the rain and watched job lots of farm machinery and bankrupt stock carpet go under the hammer, and she let the ordinary human theater of it wash the day off her. Lot 31 came up near the end, when the room had thinned to the diehards. "Lot 31, the auctioneer said, in the flat sing-song of a man who has been talking for 3 hours. "A bit of an oddity, this one. Former railway halt and station building, Brierley Halt on the old closed branch line out past Caldecott. Comprises the station house, platform, signal cabin, and a parcel of land, freehold, vacant, disused since the line closed in the 60s. Sold as seen, no access road maintained, services disconnected." He looked up without much hope. "Council's been trying to shift it for years. It's a liability more than an asset, I'll be straight with you. Listed building, so you can't knock it down, and too far from anywhere to be much use. Who'll start me at 1,000? Nobody moved. 500. It's a freehold building, ladies and gents, bricks and slate." A man near the front shook his head and looked at his phone. Iris was not, in any way she could have explained, planning to bid. She had £240 and nowhere to live and no income and a legal judgment chasing her, and a derelict listed railway station an hour from anywhere was the single most absurd thing a woman in her position could possibly buy. She knew all of that. She knew it the way she had known the receipt was wrong, completely, instantly, and against every instinct of self-preservation. And yet, she had grown up beside a railway. Her father had been a signalman, the last of a dying trade, a quiet, methodical man who had taught her to read the world the way he read his instruments, patiently, exactly, trusting the evidence over the noise. He had died believing his daughter had become someone important in a world he didn't understand, and she had let him believe it, and she had sold the photograph of him by failing to keep glass out of a bailiff's reach. A railway station was the one thing on God's earth that Iris Halloway, ruined and homeless and 38 years old, would have wanted if anyone had thought to ask her what she wanted, which no one had in over a year. £200, she said. The room turned to look at the woman at the back in the good coat gone shabby at the cuffs. The auctioneer blinked. There is, at the dying end of a council clearance sale, a great willingness to be rid of the unsellable, and a representative of the council at the side table gave the smallest possible nod. The nod of a man who has just watched a long-standing liability become someone else's problem for the price of £200. £200, the auctioneer said almost gently. The lady's 200, any advance? No. Going once, twice. The man at the front did not look up from his phone. Sold to the lady at the back for £200, and the best of British to you, love, you'll need it. There was a thin scatter of laughter. Iris did not laugh. She walked to the side table, counted out £200 from her envelope of 240, signed the forms that made her, for the first time in her life, the freehold owner of something no bank could take because no bank had wanted it, and accepted a heavy brass key on a fob stamped with the initials of a railway company that had not existed for 60 years. There's a caretaker's bunch as well somewhere, the council man said, rummaging in a box file. Apparently the last station master never handed his in. Chap called Crew, Albert Crew, ran the halt right up to closure and then just stayed on as unofficial keeper till he died decades back. Bit of a local character. Wouldn't let anyone touch the place. He found a second set of keys, iron and old, and pushed them across with a faint look of distaste, as though they carried something he'd rather not name. Funny thing, he left instructions the building wasn't to be cleared. Council ignored it, obviously, but then nobody could ever be bothered to go all the way out there and clear it either, so he shrugged. It's exactly as he left it, near enough. 40-odd years untouched. Mind how you go. Exactly as he left it. A meticulous man who guarded a place to his death and forbade its clearing. Iris Halloway took the iron keys, and something in the center of her, the part that read seams in paper and gaps in stories, went very still and very alert for the first time in over a year. Brierley Halt sat at the end of 3 miles of unmaintained trackbed, reachable on foot along the old permanent way, between embankments where the gorse had grown up wild and yellow, and the rails had long since been lifted for scrap. Iris walked it in the last of the light on the day she got the keys, with her 2 cardboard boxes left at a bus stop she'd have to go back for, and she came over a low rise and saw it standing there in the dusk, and stopped. It was beautiful. That was not the word she had expected to need. A small country station of soft red brick and ornate barge boards, a canopy of cast iron columns over a single platform, a station house with tall chimneys and a bay window, and above the empty platform, frozen, a great white-faced clock with black iron hands stopped at 14 minutes past 3. Ivy had taken one gable. A buddleia grew from a gutter. But the bones of it were sound, the slates were true, and the whole of it had the same quality the Marsh shack had not. No, she had never seen a Marsh shack. That was someone else's story. This place had the quality of something that had been loved and then abandoned mid-breath, as if the last train had simply never come and everyone had quietly agreed to wait. The iron key turned in the station house door with an oiled smoothness that, in a building disused for 60 years, made the hairs rise on her arms. Someone had kept that lock. Inside it was dim and dry and astonishingly intact. A booking office with its ticket window and racks of card tickets still in their slots, a waiting room with a cold cast-iron stove, a station master's office with a roll-top desk, a row of signaling instruments, a wall of polished levers in the little cabin through the connecting door. 40 years of dust lay over all of it like gray snow, but beneath the dust it was ordered. Albert Crew had not let his station decay around him. He had kept it the way her father kept his signal box. Every instrument in its place, every ledger squared, the brass dull but unbroken, a working life held in suspension by a man keeping faith with something long after the world stopped paying him to. She stood in the booking office in the failing light and felt, against all sense, that she had come home. And then in the stationmaster's office, behind the roll-top desk, half hidden by a fallen length of canvas blind, she saw it. A safe. Not a small one, a great green-painted Victorian floor safe, cast iron, the height of her waist, with a brass dial and a maker's plate and a heavy lever handle. The kind of safe a busy junction would have used to hold a day's takings and the company's documents. It sat squat and solid in the corner, and the dust on the floor before it had been disturbed, not recently, but at some point after everything else had been left, as though the last thing Albert Crewe ever did in this room was stand before this safe. Across the front of it, painted by hand in white letters gone yellow with age, where a railway company's name should have been, someone had written 4 words. For whoever finally listens. Iris Halloway set down her keys and knelt in the dust before a dead stationmaster's safe in a building she had bought for £200, and read those 4 words again in the last of the light, and felt the whole shape of her ruined life turn quietly on its axis like a great iron lever thrown at last. The dial gave Iris nothing for 2 days, and she let it. She had nowhere else to be and no one expecting her, and there is a particular freedom in that, once the terror of it wears thin. She fetched her 2 boxes from the bus stop. She swept the booking office. She got the cast-iron stove in the waiting room drawing, and discovered that Albert Crewe had left a half-ton of seasoned coal in the lamp room, and a store of candles and lamp oil that the dry station air had kept, so that on her second night she had light and heat, and a tin of soup warmed on the stove top, and she sat in a dead man's waiting room in the wavering candlelight, and felt richer than she had in a year. The safe she circled the way she circled everything that mattered slowly from the outside in. She would not force it. Forcing a lock teaches you nothing, and destroys the one thing a careful person leaves behind, which is the logic of how they thought. Albert Crewe had painted for whoever finally listens across the door of a thing he meant to be opened, not by a thief, not by the council, but by someone who would take the trouble to deserve it. The combination would not be random. It would be the kind of number a railwayman carried in his bones, set where the right person would think to look, and the wrong person would walk straight past. So Iris did what she was good at. She read the room. She read the ledgers first, because a stationmaster's ledgers are the diary of his days, and Albert Crewe's were a revelation of the same meticulous mind that had kept the lock oiled for 40 years. Takings, tickets, goods in and out, the daily liturgy of a small junction, and then from the late 1950s, something else threaded through the ordinary entries. Crewe had begun in his neat, indelible pencil hand to keep a second record, not of trains, of a particular kind of traffic. 14358, the Sterling consignment, 2 crates London to the house transferred to the private siding, SGD for by the same man, did not look right, noted the seals. Iris read the name Sterling in a dead stationmaster's 60-year-old ledger, and went very cold and very still in the candlelight. She made herself not leap. A coincidence of names was the cheapest trap a tired mind could fall into. Sterling was an old name. There could be a dozen unconnected Sterlings between a Victorian junction and a London auction house. She kept reading, building the picture from the evidence up rather than from the conclusion down, the way she had built the case against the ferryman at dusk, the way her father had taught her to read his instruments, not what you expect, what's there. And what was there, across a decade of Albert Crewe's careful second record, was this. Brierley Halt had not been quite the sleepy nowhere it appeared. It had served in its working years a great private house, Caldecote Court, whose owners had built the branch line largely for their own convenience, and whose name, Iris established from a framed presentation photograph in the booking office, a line of frock-coated Victorians on this very platform, was Sterling. The same family. The auction house and the country seat were one dynasty. 300 years of the word certain, and a private railway halt at the bottom of their park, kept by a station master the family regarded, as the powerful always regard the people who carry their parcels, as furniture. And the station master had been watching them. Crewe's second ledger was the record of a quiet, methodical, decades-long suspicion. Consignments that came and went from Caldecott Court by night on the private siding. Crates that arrived from the continent under one description and were collected, he noted, by men who signed false-looking names. Most damningly, an entry he had underlined twice. 4/11/61. 2 pictures down from the house for London, crated. 1 up from London the same week, crated, same dimensions, collected to the house. They have sent the same picture to and fro, or they have sent down a different one than went up. A man does not crate and rail a painting 40 miles for nothing. I have begun to think this halt exists to move things quietly that should not move quietly at all. Iris sat back on her heels. She knew this music. She had spent her life learning to hear it. They have sent down a different one than went up. It was the oldest trick in her trade and the hardest to detect, the substitution. A great house, asset-rich and cash-poor as so many of them had been after the wars, quietly selling its genuine masterpieces abroad through its own auction arm and hanging skilled copies in their place on the gallery walls, so that the family's fabled collection, the bedrock of the sterling name and the sterling reputation for certainty, remained apparently intact, visited, photographed, insured, while the originals were converted to money an ocean away. And a private railway halt at the bottom of the park, kept by a man everyone took for furniture, was exactly how you would move such things, decade after decade, without a single crate ever passing through a public goods yard where a curious clerk might ask a question. Albert Crewe had been the curious clerk, the only one, and he had been clever enough and patient enough to write none of his suspicion down where the family could find it, and to keep, she now understood something, behind a green iron door he had labeled for the one person who might one day finally listen. The realization arrived, with the combination riding on its back. She had been looking for a railwayman's number, and there it was, had been all along, in the framed presentation photograph. The line had opened on a date the brass plate beneath the Victorians recorded, and beside it, the running number of the locomotive that pulled the first train, a number any station master of the old school would have carried to his grave the way a man carries his own birthday, the day his station was born. Iris took the 3 pairs of figures from the plate, knelt before the safe, and turned the dial. The opening date, the engine's number, the year the line had closed and Crewe had begun his long, unpaid vigil. The lever turned under her hand with a deep, oiled, final clunk, and the green door of Albert Crewe's safe swung open into the candlelight. It was packed and it was ordered, and it was, she saw at once, with the trained eye that the world had told her was worthless, a case. Not a hoard, a case. The man had built over 40 years the single most patient piece of evidence gathering she had ever seen, and he had built it for a court he never expected to reach. On top, a bundle of his second ledgers, the night traffic records, tied and dated, decades of them. Beneath, a thick folder of paper, and Iris's hands knew what it was before her mind did, because paper was her gift and her curse. Shipping documents, customs paper. Carbon flimsies of consignment notes that a station master was perfectly entitled to keep copies of, recording in dry official language the movement of crates between Caldecott Court and an address in London that she did not need to look up, because she had been ruined by it. The premises of Sterling's auction house. Decades of the paper trail of the substitution, kept not by a forger or a fraudster, but by the one honest functionary the scheme had been careless enough to root its crates past. And beneath that, wrapped in oilcloth and brown paper, flat and rigid and about the size of a large book, 2 objects that made Iris stop breathing. She lifted the first into the light and unwrapped it with the slow care of a woman handling unexploded ordnance, and found herself looking at a small oil painting. A river, a boat, a cloaked figure at the oars, and the last light going down gold and gray across the water. The ferryman at dusk. For a moment the room swam. It could not be. The painting that had destroyed her hung in a provincial gallery with a brass plate beneath it, bought for £4 million by a town subscription, authenticated by Sterling's own panel, the very thing she had been called a fantasist for doubting. It could not also be here, in a dead stationmaster's safe. And then she understood, and the understanding was so large and so complete that she had to set the painting down on the desk and put both hands flat on the wood to steady herself. It could be here, it was here, because there were two. There had always been two. That was the whole shape of it. Decades ago the Sterling family had owned the genuine ferryman, a real masterpiece, the pride of the Caldecott collection, and decades ago, quietly by night, down their own private siding, they had sent the original abroad to be sold for money the family needed, and had hung a copy in its place. A very good copy. Good enough that when, 2 generations later, the family's modern auction house brought the Caldecott ferryman to public sale for £4 million, every expert they convened could pronounce it genuine. Because it was a masterpiece, just not the masterpiece, and the family that had commissioned the swap was the same family now vouching for it, and who in the world would know? Iris Halloway would know. Iris Halloway had known. She had read the forger's 2-decade slip in the provenance receipt and told the truth and been destroyed for it. She had been right. She had been right all along, about a fraud even larger and older than the one she'd caught a glimpse of, and the proof of it, the original against which the gallery's copy could be measured pigment for pigment, brushstroke for brushstroke, sat now under her 2 steadying hands, kept safe for 60 years by a stationmaster everyone had mistaken for furniture, who had stopped one of the swapped crates from going up the line and kept the original back, and labeled his green iron door for whoever finally listens, and waited. She unwrapped the second object with hands no longer entirely under her command. It was a letter, and a second sworn-looking document beneath it, and a photograph, and she would read all of them by candlelight that night and understand that Albert Crewe had not merely suspected. He had known, had been told at the end, by someone inside the house who could no longer carry it alone, and the someone who had told him was named in the letter, and the name was one Iris Halloway knew, because it was still, today, the name above the door of the grandest auction house in the country, and the woman who bore it now had signed the report that called Iris a fantasist with her own hand. Outside, far down the dark embankment, gravel shifted under a footstep, and then another, and then went deliberately, carefully still. The particular silence of someone who has just realized the abandoned station at the end of the closed line has a light burning in it for the first time in 60 years, and is no longer abandoned at all. Iris Halloway blew out the candle. Iris stood in the dark booking office with the painting against her chest, and did not move. The instinct to run was animal and immediate, and she overrode it the way she overrode every instinct that hadn't been thought through. Run where? There was one way off Brierley Halt, and it was the 3-mile track bed she'd walked in on, open ground between bare embankments, and whoever was out there was already on it, between her and the world. The station was not a trap closing on her. It was, she made herself remember, a building a careful man had kept locked and sound for 40 years. Albert Crewe had chosen to make his stand here. There would be a reason. She set the ferryman flat in the bottom of the safe, laid the ledgers and the shipping folder back over it, swung the green door to without engaging the lock. A closed safe invites work. An apparently locked one that opens at a touch wastes a searcher's time, and time was the only currency she had. And then she did the thing that 15 years of reading other people's deceptions had taught her. She arranged the scene. She lit the candle again. She set it in the booking office window, in plain view, and she sat down beside it with a railway ledger open on her lap, and a mug of cold tea at her elbow. a woman with nothing to hide reading by lamplight in the house she owned, and she waited for the footsteps to come the rest of the way, because a person who hides confirms there is something worth hiding, and a person who sits calmly in a lit window with the door unbarred makes a prowler wonder whether they have misjudged the situation entirely. The footsteps came, slowly, up the platform ramp along under the cast-iron canopy to the booking office door where they stopped. A long pause, then a knock uncertain which told her a great deal. Iris opened the door. The woman on the platform was perhaps 50, in a wax jacket and a head torch switched off in her hand, with the wind-burned face and the wary stillness of someone who spent her life outdoors and alone, and she took one look at Iris, calm, lamplit, unsurprised, and her shoulders came down an inch. "You're living in it," the woman said. "God, they actually sold it." She had a local voice, flat and careful. "I'm sorry. I saw the light from the lane and I thought, well, there's not been a light in this building in my lifetime, and there are men who have taken an interest in this place over the years that I wouldn't open a door to. I came to see who you were before I decided whether to warn you or run from you." She glanced past Iris into the room, at the ledgers, at the instruments, and something moved in her face. "You've been into his office." "You knew Albert Crewe," Iris said. "It wasn't a question." "Everyone round here knew of him. Hardly anyone knew him." The woman wiped a hand on her jacket and offered it. "Nora Ferris. I farm the land the other side of the cutting, what's left of it. My grandfather worked the goods siding here when there was a good siding. Crewe was a fixture of his stories. The stationmaster who wouldn't leave. The one who kept the place like a chapel after the line shut and saw the council off with a shotgun twice when they came to clear it." Her wary eyes held Iris's. "He had a saying my grandfather never forgot. A station sees everything and says nothing until the day it has to. Granddad always reckoned the old man was sitting on something. Half the district did, but nobody knew what, and after he died nobody could get into the place, and eventually folks stopped wondering." She tilted her head. "You don't look like you've stopped wondering. You look like you've found out." Iris weighed her, the way she weighed a provenance, for the seam, the overeager detail, the thing that tried too hard. There was none. Nora Ferris had come up a dark embankment toward an unknown light, prepared to warn a stranger, which is not what an enemy does. And she carried, unmistakably, the particular grudge of the local against the great house, the grudge of the people who are furniture against the family that owns the room. "There are men who have taken an interest," Iris repeated. "What men?" "Sterling men." Nora said the name the way Margaret Thorne, no, the way people in a place like this always said the name of the family that owned them, with a flatness that was its own indictment. "The estate's lawyers, the estate's agents. Twice in my lifetime someone's come quietly asking who'd bought the old halt, was it for sale, could they get a key. Always through somebody, never their own name. The Sterlings have wanted this building emptied for 60 years, and never quite dared be seen to want it, which round here is the loudest a thing can be." She nodded at the dark office behind Iris. "My grandfather always said the same as you're plainly thinking. Whatever Crewe kept, it's something the family would burn the building down to be rid of, and the only reason they never did is they couldn't risk being seen to care." It fitted exactly. A family whose entire fortune rested on the appearance of certainty could not afford to be seen forcing their way into a dead servant's locked station, because the question, what are they so desperate to get, was itself the thing that could undo them. So they had waited, as Iris herself had learned to wait, for the building to fall to a clearance sale and pass to some incurious buyer who'd gut it for a holiday let and skip the contents of an old safe. They had not reckoned on the incurious buyer being the one woman in England who had already, at the cost of everything she owned, doubted them and been right. "Miss Ferris," Iris said, "Nora, I'm going to trust you because I haven't the luxury of doing otherwise, and because you came up a dark hill to warn a stranger, which tells me what I need to know about you." She stood back from the door. "Come in. There's cold tea and a warm stove. And I think you'd better see what your station master was keeping." The letter, by candlelight, with Nora Ferris sitting very still across the stove, told the last part of it, the part that turned a fraud into a betrayal with a living face. It was dated the year before Albert Crewe's death, and it was not from Crewe. It was to him, in a fine educated hand on heavy cream paper headed with the Caldecott Court crest, and it was signed by a woman named Eleanor Sterling. Dear Mr. Crewe, you will not remember me, though I remember you. You gave me a platform ticket once when I was a child and let me hold the flag, and you were the only person on the whole estate who ever spoke to me as though I were a person and not an heiress. I write to you because you are the only honest person I have ever known connected with my family, and because I am dying, and because I cannot take what I know into the ground. Iris read it aloud slowly, and Nora Ferris's weather-beaten face did not move, and the wind went round the chimneys. Eleanor Sterling had been the conscience of the family and its prisoner. She had discovered, as a young woman, what her father and grandfather had done, the long, patient sale abroad of the genuine Caldecott masterpieces, the hanging of copies in their place, the use of the family's own rising auction house to launder the provenance of it, all so that the Sterling collection remained, on paper and on the gallery walls, magnificent and intact. She had been unable to stop it and unable to expose it, because she was one woman against 300 years of name and money, and she had watched the family she belonged to build an empire of certainty on a foundation of substitution. And at the end of her life, frightened, she had done the only thing she could. She had got one of the originals out, the Ferryman, the painting she loved best, the one she could not bear to see sold abroad and faked at home, and she had entrusted it, with the documents that proved everything, to the one man on the estate she knew to be honest, the stationmaster who saw everything and said nothing, until the day he had to. I cannot give this to a lawyer. Every lawyer in 3 counties is ours. I cannot give it to the police. My brother dines with the chief constable. I cannot even keep it in the house, for the house is watched by its own servants and I trust none of them but you. So I am giving it to you, Mr. Crewe, and to the railway, which has always been the one part of this estate that ran on honesty and exact time. Keep it. Keep it until someone comes who can be believed where I could not, someone with the knowledge to prove what I can only assert, and the standing to be heard, and no stake in the Sterling name. I do not know who that person will be or when they will come. I only know that they will need the original to prove the copy, and the papers to prove the original, and a witness the family cannot buy. I have given you the first 2. You, dear Mr. Crewe, by your long, honest life, are the third. Forgive me for the weight of it. I have carried it 40 years, and it has bent me double. E.S. Iris lowered the letter. Someone with the knowledge to prove what I can only assert, and the standing to be heard, and no stake in the Sterling name. She almost laughed, and the laugh would not have been a happy one. Eleanor Sterling had described, decades before Iris Halloway was born, the exact person the world had spent the last year manufacturing out of her, except for one cruel detail. Iris had the knowledge. She had no stake in the Sterling name, they had seen to that. But the standing to be heard that they had taken from her, deliberately, surgically, the moment she first doubted them. They had called her a fantasist precisely so that, when she spoke the truth, no one would listen. Which meant Eleanor's instructions could not be followed as written. Iris could not simply present the original and the papers and be believed, because she was the one person in the country whose word Sterling's had already poisoned. The fraudsters had, by ruining her in advance, accidentally built the perfect defense against the very evidence now in her hands. If the discredited doubt merchant turned up claiming the £4 million Caldecott Ferryman was a fake, and that she happened to have the real one in a railway safe, it would be laughed out of every room in Britain. It would look like the deranged final act of the fantasist they had already described. They would not even have to fight it. They would only have to smile and nod the way the powerful nod at a worthy opponent they have already destroyed. And there, in the cold booking office, With the original Ferriman in the safe and a dead woman's confession in her hand, Iris Halloway understood the true shape of the problem, and felt, for the first time in over a year, the old clean joy of a difficult thing she knew exactly how to solve. She could not be the one to make the accusation. The evidence could not arrive from her, or it died on contact with her ruined name. So it would have to arrive in a way that did not depend on her being believed at all. It would have to be a thing the world tested for itself, in public, where the Sterlings could not control the panel. A trap built not from her word, which was worthless, but from the one currency the family had spent 300 years trading on and could not refuse without confessing, their own claim to certainty. She would make them authenticate the truth with their own hands. "Nora," Iris said quietly, setting down the letter, "I need to ask you something, and the answer puts you in this with me, so think before you give it." She looked up. "How would you feel about helping me sell a painting?" Nora Ferris looked at her for a long moment across the stove. Then, slowly, the wind-burned face cracked into the first smile Iris had seen on it. "Grandad always said the old man was waiting for the right person," she said. "I think he'd have liked it being you." She leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." Iris Halloway's plan rested on a single piece of cruelty turned inside out. The Sterlings had built their empire on being the people who said what was real, and a person who has staked everything on being believed cannot afford to examine a thing and then disown their own verdict. She would not approach Sterlings as Iris Halloway. That name was poison, and she would spend it later all at once when it could do the most work. Instead, over the following weeks, funded by Nora, who quietly sold a parcel of grazing she'd been meaning to let go for years and waved away Iris's protest with, "Grandad would never forgive me if I let money stop this." Iris built a seller who did not exist except on paper, the very art she had been ruined for understanding, a provenance. A reclusive elderly collector, lately deceased, an estate in the West Country, a small oil acquired privately decades ago and never exhibited. Iris constructed it the way she had spent 15 years unconstructing the lies of others, flawless, because she knew precisely where forgers went wrong and simply did the opposite. Period-correct paper, inks that would survive the very tests she herself would once have run. A chain of ownership with no seam, because for once the chain was being built by the one person alive who knew what a seam looked like. It was, she reflected, the only entirely honest forgery in the history of the trade, a false provenance wrapped around a genuine masterpiece, built to make the truth survive contact with people determined to deny it. Then she had Eleanor Sterling's Ferriman, the real one, offered for sale, through a respectable provincial solicitor acting for the fictitious estate, to the one house grand enough to be ruined by it. Sterling's took the bait because pride leaves no other choice. A previously unknown work in the manner of the master, fresh to the market, from a clean estate. They sent their head of department to examine it. And here was the exquisite trap, the one Iris had seen the shape of in the cold booking office. Sterling's could not authenticate this painting as a copy. It was not a copy. It was the original, better in every measurable particular than the £4 million version hanging in the provincial gallery under their own brass-backed guarantee. Every test they ran would come back not merely genuine but superior. The pigments older and truer. The hand unquestionably the master's own. The canvas, the ground, the craquelure. All of it would shout authentic to the very experts whose entire credibility depended on having already declared a different painting to be the one, and only original. They authenticated it. Of course they did. They could not help themselves. The head of department's report came back glowing, and Sterling's agreed to bring the painting to public auction as a thrilling rediscovery. And the moment they put their 300-year-old name to that verdict, in writing in their own catalog, they signed the confession Iris had spent the autumn building for them. Because now the world's foremost authority on this master had certified under their own hand that two original Ferriman existed, and only one of them could be real. and the family that owned both the gallery's version and the auction house could not survive the public asking which. The woman who ran Sterling's now was named Cordelia Sterling, Eleanor's great-niece, the matriarch who had inherited the empire and the lie together, and who had personally signed the report that called Iris a fantasist. She was brilliant and certain, and the third generation to mistake the people who carried her parcels for furniture, and she was about to stand on a podium and conduct her own undoing in front of the cameras, never knowing the discredited doubt merchant had built the podium herself. The sale was held in Sterling's great rooms under the chandeliers, with the press in attendance and the rediscovered ferryman on its easel, lit like a relic, and Cordelia Sterling at the rostrum in the dove gray she favored, conducting the room with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once been wrong in public. Iris Halloway sat near the back in a plain dark coat with a numbered paddle she had no intention of using, and beside her sat Nora Ferris in the one good jacket she owned, and in Iris's bag was a slim folder she had copied many times over and lodged, that morning, with a national newspaper's arts desk, a museum trust's lawyers, and a solicitor 4 counties from any Sterling, so that what was about to happen could not, this time, be made to disappear. The bidding climbed, 2 million, 2.5. The room was warm with money and certainty. Iris stood up. "Forgive me," she said, and her quiet voice carried in the way a calm voice always carries through a noisy room. "Before this lot is sold, the buyers in this room deserve to know that the painting on that easel is the genuine ferryman at dusk by the master, and that therefore the painting hanging this morning in the Caldecott Gallery, sold by this house 3 years ago for £4 million of public subscription, authenticated by this house, is a copy." The room turned. Cordelia Sterling's gavel paused in the air. "My name is Iris Halloway," Iris said, into the silence, and watched the name land, watched the flicker of recognition and contempt cross Cordelia's face, the her, the fantasist, the beginning of the smile that had ended Iris once before. "You'll know the name. Your house spent a great deal of effort teaching the world not to believe it. I'd like to thank you for that, Ms. Sterling, sincerely, because it's the reason this works. You see, you'd never have listened to me, so I didn't ask you to. I asked you only to do the one thing your name exists to do. I asked you to tell the world what's real." She lifted the folder. "And you did. Your head of department authenticated this painting 3 weeks ago in writing in your catalog as an undisputed original. I have the report. So now your house is on record certifying 2 original ferrymen. One of them you sold to a town full of schoolchildren and pensioners. I'll let the gentlemen of the press and the museum trust's lawyers, who both have copies of everything as of 9 o'clock this morning, decide which of your 2 certainties they'd like you to explain first." The smile did not come. Cordelia Sterling stood at the rostrum she had commanded 100 times and looked at the painting, and at the report in the stranger's hand, and Iris watched the precise moment understanding arrived, watched the great house's whole architecture of certainty turn from her shield into the blade at her own throat, because there was no answer. To call this painting a fake was to confess her own expert was incompetent and her catalog worthless. To call it real was to confess the galleries was a forgery sold under her family's guarantee. Every road led to the same place. The family had spent 300 years making their word the most valuable thing in the room, and Iris had simply held a mirror up and let their word destroy itself. "Where," Cordelia said, and her voice was not quite steady, "did you get this painting?" "From a man your family mistook for furniture," Iris said. "A stationmaster named Albert Crewe who saw everything and said nothing for 40 years until the day he had to. He kept it for whoever finally listened." She let that sit. "And before him, from a woman named Eleanor Sterling, who carried what your family did until it bent her double, and who got the truth out of that house the only way she could, down a private railway line, into the keeping of the one honest man on the estate, because she couldn't find a single soul with your name she could trust to do it." Iris held up the second document, the cream paper with the Caldecott crest. She wrote it all down, Ms. Sterling. Your gray tan. She named what was sold and when and by whom. I think the press would like her words more than mine. She was a sterling. People believe a sterling. It came apart the way 3 centuries always come apart slowly, and then all at once. The 2 paintings were examined, this time by panels sterlings could not appoint, and the verdict was the one Iris had known in a cold booking office months before. The gallery's was a masterly mid-century copy. The railway's was the master's own hand. Eleanor Sterling's letter, with Crewe's 40 years of shipping ledgers and consignment flimsies beneath it, opened a door no Sterling lawyer could close, and behind that door was the long, patient history of a family that had sold its nation's masterpieces abroad and faked them at home, and used its own auction house to bless the fraud. 3 generations of it. A whole wing of the world's great collections quietly hollow. Cordelia Sterling did not go to prison. The original fraud was old and most of its architects were dead, and money fought, the way money fights. But the House of Sterling, whose entire worth had been the word certain, could not survive having certified 2 originals of the same painting, and the name that had meant real for 300 years came to mean the opposite, which for that family was a poverty no fortune could remortgage. The museum trust's $4 million was returned. And the original Ferryman at Dusk, Eleanor's painting, Crewe's painting, went, by Iris's arrangement and at her insistence, to the provincial town that had subscribed for it in good faith, to hang where the copy had hung, the real thing at last, with a new brass plate beneath it that named, among others, a stationmaster and a dying heiress. Iris did not get her old life back. She found, as ruined people often find, that she no longer wanted it. The trade that came begging for her now, the great houses falling over themselves to retain the woman who had been right when everyone was wrong, she regarded with a cool, clear eye and mostly declined. Being right isn't the same as being able to live, Daniel had told her, the night he left, and he had written, after the auction, a careful letter she read once and did not answer, because she had finally proved the thing she'd needed to prove, that he had been wrong. Being right was exactly the same as being able to live. You simply had to be willing to lose everything first, and to wait, and to keep faith with the evidence the way her father had kept faith with his instruments, and Crewe had kept faith with his station. She stayed at Brierley Halt. She used the first of the money. The trust paid her a finder's fee she tried to refuse, and Nora made her accept, to mend the roof and reconnect the water, and she turned the booking office into something between an archive and a refuge, a place where she did the one work she found she still loved, quietly authenticating provenance for people who could not afford a great house's fee, restoring to the world the small, honest certainty the great houses had debased. Nora farmed the land beyond the cutting and came for supper most evenings. They mended the great white-faced clock together. The one stopped at 14 minutes past 3, and on the morning they set it running again the whole valley could hear it strike, the first time in 60 years that Brierley Halt kept the time. Iris had Albert Crewe's safe left exactly where it stood, the green door open now and empty, and across the front, beneath his yellowed "For whoever finally listens," she added a line of her own, for whoever the long closed line might one day send down it next. She went in the end and stood on the platform in the early light, where a frock-coated family had once posed, and a dying woman had once been handed a flag by the only person who treated her as real. The world had evicted her with 2 cardboard boxes and called her a fantasist and a doubt merchant and watched her fall, certain it had finished her. It had been wrong about her the way the powerful are always wrong about the people they discard, mistaking having nothing left to lose for having no power, when it is in truth the one power that money cannot reach and reputation cannot poison. They had taken her standing so that no one would believe her. So she had built a truth that did not need to be believed, only tested, and she had handed the great house of Sterling the test, and let 300 years of their own certainty do what her ruined word never could. The clock struck the hour over the empty platform. Iris Halloway listened to it ring out true across the valley, exact and honest and 60 years overdue, and understood the thing the whole long fall had been teaching her. That the truth does not require anyone's permission to be true. It only requires one person patient enough to keep it, and one more, somewhere down the line, willing to lose everything to finally listen.